I was working patrol on a day shift during the summer. It was around 8 a.m. in the morning when dispatch called for a disorderly subject at the Exxon gas station. Upon arriving to the front of the gas station, I saw a crowd of customers common for a weekday. I remembered taking an energy drink earlier, so I was ready for anything that day. I walked into the store and made contact with two Indian gentlemen with whom I've had great interactions with during previous calls. One of the gentlemen called my attention to a customer standing near the ATM machine. As I walked closer, I noticed that the subject was taking his index finger on his left hand and swiping it on the outside of the slot, normally where the credit card would slide. Oddly enough, he held a large amount of cash in his right hand. I immediately recognized Michael from previous interactions, which were mostly him being strung out on some narcotic. I asked Mike if everything was okay, but he momentarily ignored me and continued to swipe the credit card slot with his finger. He responded by telling me that the machine wouldn't take his card. His eyes were bloodshot. I asked Mike why he didn't use the cash he had in his hand, and he indicated that he would rather use his credit card, which I equated as an uncooperative response. The store was busy, and I noticed that there were cameras everywhere, so the collateral damage would be high if I opted to throw Mike into a stand of protein bars. Again, I advised Mike that the machine was not working because he used his finger. He paused, stopped swiping, and looked at me and asked me to repeat myself. I then asked him to come outside so that we could talk further. Mike refused and returned to swiping his finger. I called for a backup unit. I asked the attendant if there were any cameras inside the car wash, which was adjacent to the store. I grabbed Mike by his arm and he barely resisted as I dragged him in the direction of the car wash. Standing in the middle of the car wash, we were shaded by the hot sun. While talking to Mike, he was getting nervous and shouted obscenities at me. In addition to receiving training as a police officer, I've received extra special training in how to handle people shouting obscenities at me. It was during Italian family get-togethers. Mike began to fiddle around his pockets, and he didn't comply to my requests. I grabbed his wrists, retrieved my handcuffs, and locked one of his wrists. He then snapped and swung his arms with one of the cuffs still around his wrists. My partner and I tackled Mike onto his stomach, but Mike refused to show his hands, which he tucked underneath his stomach. I took my bicep under his neck and squeezed. After I released the chokehold, I felt Mike's body go limp, and finally he slept. We cuffed him, placed him in our car, and then later he was brought to the hospital for a psych evaluation. My arm was abraded from being scraped on the ground during the tackle. A night shift officer drove to my location and inquired about the incident. After comparing notes, the night officer told me that he also arrested and transported Mike to the hospital because he was high on ecstasy. I entered the store and the attendants started clapping while they pointed to the cameras and excitedly stated how much of a good show I put on. They admitted that the cameras worked. I left with a good feeling, but thought there was a chance that I made WorldStar that night.